Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast. And today, myself and Dakota are going to talk about Spike Lee's 1992 film, Malcolm X. And before we get started, I just want to explain something to the audience. I don't have terrible eyes, but it is recommended that I wear glasses at least sometimes when I feel like I need them. So I'm just going to break the ice with everybody at home, all, 50 of you, uh, uh, with these glasses here. So I'm going to try them on. They're not a prop for Malcolm X. It's not what I was trying to do. It's just coincidental. But
Totally.
here we go. Now I look.
Do that the whole time.
Yeah. I look a lot more.
Total coincidence.
Total coincidence. But yeah, it is a coincidence. I'm still getting used to them, so I might honestly take them off halfway through if I get irritated.
All right.
We'll see how it goes. All right, so for the film Malcolm X in 1992, just to give a little bit of context in where we are in America in the point in 1992 is the King riots happened. There's a lot of, much like the present, there's a lot of racial divide and racial misunderstanding and a lot of oppression being had.
It used to come every 30 years because then about 30 years before LA was Detroit. And so and then we just had, Minneapolis and all that. So I don't know, 30 years, shit just hits the fan every time. So I don't know. But
it never seems to go away for sure. So the opening of this film starts with, it kind of begins almost like to me it's like an inverse of the opening of the film Patton, where you see Patton, and that opening is so powerful because it's kind of like this political opening credit sequence where you get the basic credits like Spike Lee film or Spike Lee joint, and then Denzel Washington, and it's, you see like old like clippings of like the KKK and news clippings of police murdering people, and the voiceover in it is I'm honestly not sure if it was
Denzel or Malcolm X himself or
correct. Yeah, because it's almost just more of a compliment to Denzel than anything else, just because of how seamless the performance is.
Yeah, he doesn't look exactly like him or anything, but he's so he does totally inhabit the character. It's an absolutely fantastic performance. So, you forget any dissimilarities just visually,
And maybe the hardest thing to mimic is the thing that he does perfectly. We don't usually bring this stuff up at the beginning where we do this character analysis at the beginning, but it
might make sense to do with this one.
Yeah, it's our most character-focused movie so far. Like, it's the only one that's like the title of someone's name
named after.
Yeah. So, and most of the supporting actors, like, there's plenty of fine, supporting performances, but no one takes a scene from Denzel, and no one takes a scene from Malcolm X.
Well, what's his name who plays Elijah Muhammad? I'm just looking at photographs. Looks a hell of a lot like looks more like that character, certainly. But I don't know. I can't remember his mannerisms or how he speaks or anything. But just looking at a picture, it's like, holy shit, guy looks just like him. So, but whereas, I guess again, Denzel might not look exactly like one-to-one like Malcolm X, but he totally inhabits the character to where you just don't really even think about it at all. And so, which is rare in a biopic.
Right. And I'm actually more of a fan of, even if an actor doesn't look exactly like who they're portraying in a biopic, if the actor is the right actor for the movie, just do it. Like the Bob Dylan movie, I'm not here, or I'm not there. Or Bob Dylan movie. Kate Blanchett,
Yeah.
Like, she does great.
Yeah, that was
And she doesn't,
that,
he like Bob Dylan's kind of feminine-ish for a
well,
guy, but
and each one was kind of covering a period in his life. So, I think, or an element of who he was, and they're all supposed to form Bob Dylan. So, I mean, so yeah, I think, especially for what the movie was trying to accomplish, it could definitely get away with it. But yeah, God, her performance of that was just, yeah, I mean, she's just a fantastic actress. But I suppose we're talking about Malcolm X. So, but yeah, no, I
yeah.
get what you're saying.
Yeah, the point I'm making is someone might not look exactly like Caesar, but if their performance embodies Caesar, that's more important to me.
Or I suppose, God, a fucking Brando, I suppose, right? I mean,
Yeah,
so yeah,
that'd be yeah, like that's the kind of power you need, and I
right.
think that's the harder thing to do too, and that's what Denzel Washington achieves in this movie is harder than what you see on the surface, because he is actually capable of sort of living in like the
Yeah.
power and the fearlessness that Malcolm X had in real
I
life.
mean, it looks totally effortless. So I didn't think about any of this watching it. And it's really, it's just after the fact that you realize, well, God, that was fantastic, because I didn't think about it. So that's really rare in a biopic again. Like, I mean, because normally you feel like it's an actor playing somebody. Like, I mean, I really just didn't think of it as, I know it's Denzel, obviously, but I didn't think of it that way. Like, so, the fact that over 3.5 hours never popped into my mind is really, I think, a testament.
A lot of people can just listen to the listen to old tapes, listen to this, watch that, and I'm sure Denzel did that. But at the end of the day, it's not about how much you can make your voice sound like Mark Zuckerberg, or make your voice sound like Capote, or make your voice sound like Malcolm X. It's about how well you can live within their body, what I
Yeah,
mean, like
yeah,
that frame.
there's this sort of, yeah, there's this intangible something where it's like you can have a performance. I mean, I think they're often called Oscar bait, because especially if there's lots of prosthetics and all, like, but some of those are absolutely deserving. I mean, I would say Philip Seymour Hoffman and Capote was really damn impressive, but there are times where it can almost be distracting, because there's a sort of dissonance where you're like, I know this is doing a voice, and you can't quite set, like, whereas Denzel, yeah, it's seamless. You're just completely immersed in the story. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, because there's so many biopics and they're so hard for me to figure out what the rules should be. And,
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was kind of meditating about after watching this movie, is how to talk about a biopic.
right.
Because a biopic,
It's probably the toughest for
a
me, honestly.
director, and Spike Lee is a super stylistic director. Like, he does all kinds of makes all kinds of bold decisions, and you know he's
Uh,
like he's a very creative director. But sometimes in a biopic, especially of someone that's as respected as like Malcolm X, is you have to be careful with like being too stylized and in intruding too much on the person that was, you know what I mean? It's
right.
still about Malcolm X. This movie is not really about Spike Lee,
Yeah, I
and I
mean,
think he sees that, and I think
well,
he does a
that
great
was
job of that throughout.
this showed a lot of restraint, especially coming off of. I just went back and rewatched Do the Right Thing and She's Got to Have It, and I
Mhm.
mean, very stylized with Do the Right Thing, and then even She's Got to Have It. There's a lot of unique camera. It's very energetic. He brings a lot of energy to the way he shoots things. But Malcolm X is a lot more restrained. I think those that energy, I guess, the stuff that feels a little over the top is sort of earlier in the picture, and then that's almost completely gone after like probably the first third. But I think when it's used, it works. When they're
Yeah,
like doing that skip down the street or whatever, and stuff like
yeah,
that.
that's actually one of the first things I wanted to talk about, because they go through. Okay, so the opening is like kind of this reverse pattern where we have the voiceover.
Cuts the background into an X, and I mean,
Right.
I'm trying
It
to remember
begins
visually.
with it's not an American dream for us being, African American people. that it's an American nightmare, and then I believe the American flag burns into the shape of an X.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the two, but I just remember the flag backdrop, so that's comparable. Obviously, it's that opening. I mean, I think it highlights everything that's controversial about the character immediately, and opening on that. I mean, it's a very bold move, and it sort of got me thinking about. I mean, I suppose in the 90s you had VHS and you could go to a Blockbuster and everything, but a lot of people are still probably watching things in the theater. I suppose you know what you're getting yourself into if you walk into Malcolm X, but say you don't. I mean, people are less inclined to probably walk out of a theater than they are to say just change something on Netflix. I think that's sort of something that's. I just read that there was like a controversy about they're getting hate like you're gonna fuck up Malcolm X, and then and then obviously other people might feel that you're endorsing Malcolm X too much, and so it's like this complete balancing act is what I understood. So I don't know if he ended up pissing people off or not, but I think he did a really good job ultimately, just my personal of balancing things out. But I don't know if other people felt that way. Like I know critics liked it. That's all I know. So
right. I mean, I guess anybody that would have preferred to see Malcolm X like turn into a different film, you know what I mean, for whichever side the audience is on, where it's too much praise or too little too much backing off, you know what I mean, like whichever way one would be critical about that, I think that would be a criticism that they have of Malcolm X himself. I think that's the approach Spike Lee took, because he displayed it matter of factly, where he starts off, he doesn't really have he's not aimless, but he doesn't really have like a focus like of what he wants to be. And then Islam and Black Power movement gave him hit, like he knew what to do with his life from that point on. Finds peace towards the end of the movie, a peace to where he's like, white people can help, but they cannot. Like, I still don't think we're like ready to unite. We need to focus on ourselves at this point. That's kind of the message at the end of the movie that we kind of leave off with, but that's also the message we left off with Malcolm X in real life, because he found a balance later in life where, whether you believe he should be even more straightforward about things, or if he should back off more, doesn't matter. This is what he was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely seems that, I mean, as far as my limited knowledge, I mean, I'm not, it's limited now anyway, but I mean,
not a historian.
I forget, sorry, but it seems to color within the line. So for the most part.
And then, so we start in Boston, and this is that crane shot that we were both alluding to, where, I just love the crane shot, because it goes in on this neighborhood, this like black neighborhood in Boston, where everyone is just dressed so like eye-poppingly bright and dancing, and like it's almost like
it looks like West Side Story or a musical or something. It's very over the top. And I mean, well, I wish I could find a word other than over the top, but I mean, because it's not surreal. I don't know.
It kind of feels surreal, because all of the film, like the old footage that we see, I mean, sure, there's some color photos in the 40s, but people weren't like regularly like filming real life neighborhoods in the 40s, and just how they dressed and stuff, and it really just takes you into this world, and is like
a lot of bright yellows, which obviously is supposed to evoke happiness. So I did catch that. So yeah, it's very colorful. So so I don't know if it's like unrealistic necessarily. I think it just pops so much that it almost, I guess surreal would be the right word. There's nothing inherently unrealistic about it, Even the over the top, I mean, whatever thing. I mean, it's like, I don't know, you might do stupid, but it all just lends itself to feeling. Um, I don't know.
It,
Yeah. Well, okay. Sorry.
it probably feels surreal to anyone that didn't live in that neighborhood or in that time.
Well,
Or
actually,
and
well, no, it's interesting that you brought up that, black and white probably. Yeah, because I think having all that color is another thing. Yeah, it really makes it feel alive and really puts you in this. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, because typically you see that in black and white. And there's so much life here. There's so much color. Yeah, sorry.
And I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure if this was what was if this is what Spike Lee might have thought. Some of the because you can make the argument that someone's like inspired by everybody, but sometimes you have an idea and it is unique to you, but someone had done it before. But the point is like the crane shot itself, like the dynamics of it, where it starts on top of a like a above ground, like looks like train system, and then
you're right. No, I know the area that. Yeah. Fuck, I'm trying to remember, but yeah, no, right. So
right, and then it drops down underneath, goes towards our characters here, who are Spike Lee and then Denzel Malcolm X. Spike Lee's character, I believe, is just referred to as Shorty throughout. And then it tracks them, gets them walking with the strut, and just tracks it right back on through, and then into the next scene. It reminded me a lot of Orson Welles, one of Orson Welles' many unfinished projects, Touch of Evil, where that movie
that was finished, wasn't it?
I don't think it was finished.
Not the way he wanted, but it was finished.
I don't think he considered it finished. I think Kane is the only one that he was like actually good with.
Oh, I didn't know that. So there's like, is there like footage for Touch of Evil that like has surfaced or something, or?
I don't know how much of. I think Touch of Evil might actually be on HBO Max. So.
No, well, I've seen it. I mean, it's a finished movie, but I know he was never sad. He's like, the studios are fuckers with everything. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he considered it unfinished. But I mean, was there a bunch of stuff that was cut from that like? Just...
I'd imagine so. But the scene I'm thinking of is the opening scene in Touch of Evil, where it is like a similar kind of crane shot, and then it goes into a close up on like a wristwatch, and then gets into a car, and like just the camera movement. And
I remember the car sort of. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a few years, but no, okay, yeah. So like that.
It just really kind of just like swoops you into the story. But yeah, so that's a very impressive scene that I think just can immediately get an audience into the world they're trying to portray.
It feels like a musical. Like, actually, now because you just brought that up, now that I think, like, I suppose it was probably deliberate, sort of like West Side Story or something. That goes away, but
one thing, just to talk about this portion, because this is like 40s Boston, and we later see like 40s Harlem. And one thing that's impressive about Malcolm X is how you basically have to do production design and costume design and all of that for like 3 different decades. And it's the 40s, it's the 50s, and it's the 60s. So it
definitely is an epic. Like in everything you expect from an epic, it's there. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I'd say it's up there with the greats, actually. I mean,
it might be like, might be like talking about this like too quick or whatever, but this is probably, I probably like Do the Right Thing the best still of Spike Lee's movies. And I think Malcolm X is second best. And then after that, I'm like I like one of the funner movies, like He Got Game or She's Gotta Have It, which both are, fucked up and sad in their own ways. But
I didn't like She's Gotta Have It, but like in terms of how it technically it works. It's just a personal thing where it's like I felt like the story was rather pointless because I didn't like the main character. I mean, you have movies like a Spread with Ashton Kutcher where it's like, I mean, it's not a bad movie, or I suppose this will be a controversial opinion, but like even The Master, I know people love that movie. I'm not saying I don't, and it ended the way that it would be a disservice. I mean, it ended the way it was always going to, for that character. But then when I think about it, I'm like, God, that was just horribly depressing, and what the fuck was the point? So there are kind of movies like that where it's like, I mean, it's faithful to the character, but there's like nothing really changes, and She's Gotta Have It is kind of like that. But on a technical level, it's well made. There's, I mean, the act, it's everything about it works. It's just, I didn't really like the protagonist, but whatever. Do the Right Thing was really, it has a lot more energy, and this is a lot more restrained. So I think we were talking about Memories of Murder versus Parasite, where like Parasite is much more in line with that director. I think artistically, like that's, but Memories of Murder is a lot more restrained. So it's a matter of flavor, I guess. I think he's scaling himself, or reining himself in a bit with Malcolm X, really trying to do it justice, it feels like, and not those over the top scenes are really just earlier in the film. And then he mostly, like that just goes away later on. So
yeah, they go into a barber shop, and at this point, it is kind of important to like know that he's like wearing his hair straight back, and he's,
before I forget, so the one thing I want to say is that all of this makes it completely apparent that he's trying to blend in with white people. The thing I want to say is that I wish they wouldn't have made a statement later on in the film. It's one of the few missteps in this where they say outright, you're putting this poison in your hair to try and look like a white guy, because I felt like that was completely evident and established in this first scene. Like, you don't need that to be said, because you're like, this is horrible and painful and awful, and he's going through all this trouble. And I just felt like they didn't need to state it outright. And then my only other real criticism comes in towards the end, where I felt like it got preachy and it undermined the rest of the movie that's been so good about that sort of thing. So that, yeah, that's just the one thing I wanted to comment on, is like, this scene is great. It just didn't need the later scene explaining what this scene means, because it's completely evident, self-evident,
yeah,
this is horrible and it burns like hellfire, and he's sort of covetous, or I don't know what the right word would be, but it's yeah. So, but he's poisoning himself, burning himself, going through all this agony to fit in and blend in and get something that he can never really have,
yeah. And I think you're right, and I think it's like, for the first part of the movie, like, it's all subconscious, right? So like, I don't think he even realizes that he's, he's doing these things that are like,
well,
either
I mean,
stripping,
everybody's doing it,
right? Yeah,
so,
a bunch of people, like a bunch of his, black friends are doing it, like
yeah.
where, yeah, but he doesn't realize that in a certain way he's stripping himself from a culture. You know what I mean?
But
And
I don't even think it gets that like intense. It's like, I mean, because like just on a visual level, like this causes him a great deal of pain, and it's like, I mean, it doesn't feel like, I mean, he's going through all this trouble. His scalp's burning like hellfire. I mean, it's, and for what is kind of your sense of it? Like, I mean, it doesn't look like it's worth it, so.
yeah, and that's just a really good mirror on kind of where, the Malcolm X in the story and the Malcolm X in real life was at like that point where like he's trying to fit in,
Yeah.
or to this, standard that he, believes is the stand, or sees as the standard at this point in his life, but it doesn't take until he goes into prison for him to like kind of like, meet that one guy, and then sort of embrace his own,
Well,
self.
and that's another contention as the movie goes on, though, is like, I mean, he keeps embracing things, other ideas, other people, other things large. I mean, it's only at the very end that he starts to adopt his own ideas, and then sadly, well, you see how that goes. But
so then we also get flashbacks in this movie, and one of the first flashbacks is the KKK burning his home as his childhood home,
yeah,
to the ground. And also I googled this a little bit just to like make sure I'm, getting whatever right. But the his mother believes that Malcolm X's mother believes that his father was actually killed by KKK members and
Yeah.
like thrown in front of a streetcar because they looked at some of the evidence and it was like, oh, he was bashed in the back of the head with something, and there's bruises that don't make sense and whatnot.
Yeah,
And
I mean, if
wounds.
the being smacked in the back of the head thing is true, I don't, maybe bumped his head, but I mean, if it's, she describes it as like being hit in the head with a hammer. I know that this is the other thing, it's adapting it from his autobiography, but it's not even an autobiography because it's like a secondhand passing down. So I think as a biography picture, you can get away with a lot of things, but actually the movie doesn't really take that license. It mostly, like I said, operates within the confines of what's generally known. I mean, it does definitely frame that as foul play, but
Right.
um,
Like, like you make a good point. Like they don't show like a KKK member like bash him in the back of the head or whatever,
oh
but
no, yeah, we just see
but
the outcome.
they do see him sprawled over like the trolley tracks, even like in the court of law or however they determine that case where they're like, yeah, he tripped, you know what I mean? Like this is
Yeah. Well, I think they
this
said
is
suicide, and then she got fucked out of the insurance, I think, and like
mm.
yeah, so
And
because it was a
so
suicide.
it's almost like they're showing it as though like, okay, well, this is what his death would have looked like if it was just an accident, and it's him just screaming on a trolley, and you don't see the people around him
Well,
that
yeah,
put
most
that.
people that right. Well, yeah, if it's a suicide, you're probably not like, oh shit. I mean, so I
Well,
think
yeah,
yeah, I
you
think
know,
it's a perspective thing where it's like, I mean, that's certainly
right.
how he sees his father. That's how the mother sees things as having happened. And from what we've seen and do know, it's not like that's a total stretch. I mean, they did burn down his fucking house. He was definitely not well liked. And, so I think that was a great um, sort of contrast, the father versus this, like he just uses this split-second shot where the father in front of the burning home after Malcolm's home later in the picture is burned down, and you have that scene where it's like, I'm a man, I mean, it just like very similar outcomes for these two characters, the
Yeah,
father and the son. But I really like that. It was just a split-second clip, but it immediately connects it in your mind because it's maybe something I wouldn't have noticed on a first viewing. So I feel like that's the way those sort of things should be done, because some movies will go like way too over the top with flashbacks or like, you're stupid, so here's like another 15 minutes of shit you've already seen just to clue you in. Like Spike Lee just uses like 10 or 5 seconds just to connect that thematically in your
yeah,
head.
yeah. That's one thing I really wanted to like praise like Spike Lee about is like so often in any biopic of like any subject matter, like the like flashbacks involved look, they're just bad or they're cliche.
Right.
This like Malcolm X is like, in Malcolm X the flashbacks are, they give you what you need as an audience, and it gives it to you like with no guards around it, or no restraint. I feel like when tragic things happen to where a flashback is necessary in a movie or whatever, and you need to show how that tragic thing happened, like most of the things that people latch on to that are flashback worthy in a movie are super tragic or super impactful in that way. And I think in real life, when you talk about your past, like, but the tragic things always kind of feel like sudden, is how I would say. Like, because, I would say, I got married, I had a kid, the kid died. You know what I mean? And that,
Yeah.
and that always, like, everything seems like, but it just, everything seems like a normal, like, okay, you got married, something good's gonna happen, and then boom, the bad thing. And I think they give you Spike Lee gives you the flashbacks in this movie as like, boom, like house burned down, boom,
Yeah.
father most likely murdered. Uh
And those
like
are the things that are extraordinary. I mean, most people don't have their house burned down. Most people don't like, and that totally fucks up the mother, and then they're taken away from her. I mean, these are maybe that some people have to contend with, but usually having your house burned down by the KKK or a sect of the KKK, whatever. I mean, it is not an everyday experience. So that would probably stand out, and it does happen quite. It's very in your face. Yeah. So I mean, but I think he presents those flashbacks, something I think was impressive. There are probably specifics I'm forgetting, but he presents information as it comes up, which is another interesting thing. So you don't get this big dump of like, this was my childhood in like a linear progression or whatever, like things from his childhood pop up as we start to see those elements that might have affected him become more relevant in his life, so which I think is a really, and it's not confusing or anything though either, which is a difficult thing to do. But presenting the information as it becomes relevant is something that very few biopics I think have ever done, and very few movies even have the sense to do. So I don't want to like blow smoke up. I do have criticisms of the movie, but that was something I don't think I've seen a movie do that better, where like presenting flashbacks as they become relevant, but also without them feeling intrusive, precisely because they're so relevant.
I would say maybe the JFK flashbacks. Yeah, in the JFK movie flashbacks.
Oh, Oliver Stone. Okay.
Yeah, the Oliver Stone film. I think those ones kind of go pretty seamlessly. But, I mean, there's not many movies that do it better than Malcolm X or really JFK. Man, the 60s were wild. Great.
Well, maybe I'm not. Okay, so it shows the flashbacks without them taking up a huge portion of the film, and it does it without them losing their impact, but it does it quickly enough where you don't become bored with it. It doesn't become a big aside or whatever. So, like, I just
they step right back into the movie.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like it robbed the movie of its pacing, but it doesn't. It also doesn't do a disservice to the flashbacks either. Like so. But yeah, that both their houses are burned down. But I mean, he's very much becoming his father. Even though he's killed at a very young age. Like there's So I thought that lended itself to the tragedy overall, and just making that quick connection. Which, like I said, other movies overdo just in general, like especially if there's a big revelation at the end of the movie, like remember this and this and this and this. It's like I mean, well, maybe I'm stupid, but the audience typically is. Like, I mean, they don't need you to play back 15 minutes of clips for them to understand the connection. So Spike Lee just takes like 5 seconds, and and I was just like, it totally clicked, so. I haven't really seen that done. It's kind of bold. It was hard and rough, but it totally worked. So splicing it in like that.
But yeah, and then there's we're still in the 40s. It's still super colorful costume wise, and just production design and costume were both like fucking great this year. All right, so Malcolm X was nominated for best costume design, but it lost to Bram Stoker's Dracula.
The Coppola one. Yeah, the Francis Ford Coppola one.
Yep.
Okay.
I do not remember the costumes in Coppola's Dracula.
To me, they were too garish or whatever. I mean, like they were too flashy. Like it felt kind of, it felt like a costume piece, like in a distracting way.
Like they were almost flashy in Dracula, and then like they were like, oh, we don't like the Flash as much in Malcolm X.
Yeah, where it's like it's more
where it makes sense.
Like, I mean, well, okay, like Dracula is like a fucking catwalk. Like, I mean, it's so in your face. I haven't watched that movie in so many years. So I hope I'm not doing it a disservice. But from my memory, like as soon as you said it, like I started thinking, I'm like, that shit was kind of distracting. It was a fashion show more than like immersive. Maybe that was a stylistic choice or something that I'm just not remembering. But
I feel like for Dracula, like a movie like Dracula, it's not going to lend to something that's like really colorful. My point here is Malcolm X should have won for costume design. Probably, I would have to really look at the other movies closely, but I feel brash enough to say that Malcolm X should have won it for costume design and should have been
No, actually, I'd
nominated.
agree with that. I mean, just again, working from my memory, which is so far off now, but Coppola's costume design, it was probably a deliberate decision, but felt distracting to me. So Malcolm X is impressive because you have to, like you said, span all that time. And I
Three
mean, yeah,
decades, three of the
right.
most like colorful like costume decades you could imagine.
No, and
Um,
it evokes a certain kind of feeling. So whereas like Coppola's, I never really going back a long ways, but I never really, even as a kid, thought of it as more, it was flashy. It wasn't really anything more than that. It was just flashy. It stuck out to me. And
uh,
that's how I remember it. So, I mean,
yeah, the costumes serve as a character in Malcolm X,
yeah,
kind of.
right. They
And
evoke a response in the audience. And
and I feel like production design deserved maybe a nomination just because like the kind of speakeasy type bars where they were once a speakeasy and past prohibition, they're now legitimate. Like I love those kind of old like 40s like club like looking places. Like yeah,
oh, yeah.
I just love that vibe.
Yeah.
Um, what happens in this dance? He goes to the dance with Teresa, but she's kind of like raised strict and like not gonna have sex on like the first date and stuff, and not till they're gonna get married. And her story is like low key tragic as fuck.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, and I think it's almost more tragic with how it's like displayed by like
That's,
and spliced into the script, and it yeah that
I'm
one's
trying to, did that ever get any kind of resolution or is it just kind of something that's off to the side?
she well no she okay so basically in this Malcolm X chooses to be with a white woman Sophia over a black woman Teresa, and like for just attraction reasons, and then like also the reason of like Teresa's like old school and not gonna have sex.
Yeah.
um and basically at I guess we can describe this now, but as the movie goes on, when Malcolm X comes back and he's almost at his most powerful and most brash, and he's full Malcolm X, we see him walking through this like old neighborhood, and then Teresa's there and she's a prostitute.
Okay, yeah, because like earlier we see him in the club setting and she's got a boyfriend who's strung out. And and he's, I forget what he fucking needs, like 10, $30 or whatever. And Malcolm sees where this is going and he's like, is she a prost yet? And like, not yet, but that's obviously that's where this is going. And so no, okay, well then there's the resolution. This okay, he's like, yeah, that felt like a dangling thread to me, but no, we get our answer at the end of the day, and it never, there's nothing else with her like past that. Just
No,
she.
not past that. So like
That's
that's
fucking awful.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
and like she's kind of just like looking on as to at like how successful and powerful Malcolm X became, and
Yeah,
it's
I
like
thought I saw her a little later in the picture, but they never. Yeah, that sucks. That's
yeah,
awful.
I mean, yeah, low key, she might have the saddest storyline in or one of them in this entire
Well, and
movie.
I thought it too. Like before they said anything, I'm like, I thought that's where it was going, but then I thought maybe there'd be sort of an arc where that didn't happen, and you're saying it totally does. So okay, well
It's
that is horribly depressing. Okay, well,
yeah, it yeah,
because she's
it
so pure. I mean, that was the whole point, is that she's so pure, and you can see where she got herself into that because of her purity. She's trying to help this dude out, who's strung out, and she's trying to make money for him, and it's like it's just yeah, it
yeah,
really
sometimes you become like too good of a person for your own good, and
right.
then
It's fucking horrible. That's horrible. Okay,
yeah,
I
I
missed
mean,
that. I
like
thought that was a dangling thread.
I like how that was worked in the script, but yeah, damn, it is fucking horrible. um
Yeah.
when you actually think about it. And then he has some pretty hot car sex with Sophia. There's kind of like an old style of filming that scene too. It almost feels like, you know,
Those makeouts.
like a like yeah, like a true 1940s movie makeout. scene
Yeah.
or something where it's kind of got this like sort of almost like plaster feel to it. I don't know if I'm describing that well at all, but just
I get what you're saying. I don't know
sort
if
of this,
I mean, it's hard to clue people in if they don't know, but I mean, yeah, I don't know
yeah,
what the word.
where like the background, for instance, like is very like kind of seems like a matte paint, like a painting on like a set, and
Right.
some people might think, oh, that looks fake, that looks cheesy. I
That's
actually
sort of the point.
I actually
Well,
think that looks great. Where we leave off is the flashbacks with the father dying, child services coming into play, and sort of tearing apart their family. And we finish off his story in Boston with him working for this like working in the back of this kitchen, and they're watching like Joe Lewis
on a
at,
train.
yeah, in this kitchen on a train, and they're listening to a boxing match on the radio and getting excited. And then I believe like one of their bosses comes in and scolds them, and basically like sort of the message is like get back to work, like black people need to like work twice as hard type of thing. Or I
Well,
believe that was
the thing
kind
is
of,
that I mean, they're all laughing and having a good time, and then the boss steps in. I mean, and they're all, but then they all turn against Malcolm because Malcolm's, oh yeah, calls the boss by the wrong name, and then they all suddenly turn on him. Then they're reunited through the results of the game, but I think the idea is, it kind of ties in with something I probably should have said earlier, but well, maybe if it presents itself, it's not a big idea, but the benefit of a biopic is that you get to do kind of a portraiture. And I think as far as what works within a portrait, the idea here is that, but that he's, I mean, they do have a job and they do have, I mean, you have a tough ass boss, but there's sort of this other element to it, I guess, where it's trying to paint this picture that they're all getting along, they're all doing what they're supposed to. And then they turn on each other as soon as somebody's, as soon as the boss comes in there and tries to get, and
yeah.
then they point to Malcolm, and then they get along once they find out the results of the game. But it's just it's unpleasant because they were all getting along, and then they're not, and then they are, and it's sort of like well, I guess we were talking about Tarantino, but he does a lot of that, tugging around with emotions, and you don't know if
And
things are going to
it's
get
kind of an encapsulation of things that happen later on.
right. That's the thing. Again, it's a portrait. So like anybody else could just be like, this is a job. It's your typical job. You got to answer to the boss. But I think the way the movie's trying to frame it is, somebody's got to pick up the blame, and everybody just wants to keep what they have and be content with that. So, you know,
And then we come to Harlem.
that's,
Harlem,
yeah.
that's kind of when he starts to get involved with like some crime. Like he gets in a bar fight. Where he like just smashes he smashes the guy in the head with a bottle, I believe. And then so the bar fight happens, and then he meets Archie, who is a gangster. He's played by Delroy Lindo, who was in Da 5 Bloods and Gone in 60 Seconds and stuff like that. He's like the first one that kind of takes him under his wing. Like he like dresses better because he's kind of working for this like mobs kind of organization. He starts getting him in on numbers games, which are like kind of this daily lottery that I looked it up just to make sure I like knew what was going on or whatever. But it's like this daily lottery that's like this illegal underground thing. And they would basically rig it or whatever, and then get money off of it. And this is when he first does cocaine. He does it with Sophia. And then
It's sort of a tense scene, like, I mean, they get the guns out. I mean, you think, I mean, yeah. And actually, I think he uses a real gunshot effect or whatever, because they're doing this pew pew thing, and in a way he got him. He did shoot him because now he's hooked on coke, now his girlfriend's hooked on coke. I mean, so I guess I think that was probably the point of that sound effect, but anyway, sorry. Yeah.
yeah. And then there's like this also like this there's this numbers game fuck up where like he has the correct, I believe he had the correct
I thought so
number.
too. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought he had it.
but
But
like it just ended like communication breakdown, and it just like ended with like a fight with like him and his sort of like gangster mentor Archie.
Well, you can see
And
where that would come from. Yeah, I don't know if it's a perspective. I mean, I think even the movie starts to make you question whether it doesn't. I mean, he ultimately says it doesn't even matter. But I mean, yeah, I thought that was the right number from my memory. But then his girlfriend supports that. But Archie's like, well, what the fuck does that prove? She's your girlfriend. She's of course she's going to say whatever you say. Um, it does matter story wise whether she's backing him up or not. But I mean, but I'm not actually sure myself on whether the number's correct or not. Ultimately, I
yeah,
think it is.
I
But
I, I think it was, but it just shows you a little bit of like distrust with him and like a mentor, right?
but that's everything for him because, like, I mean, Archie prides himself on storing all the numbers in his head. So if he gets it wrong, that's his rep on the line, and that's the whole point. So, like, what seems like a minor slight, is it everything to him? That's his entire reputation. So, he's like, "Don't do this, Malcolm." And he's like, and Malcolm drops it, but Archie, like, I mean, yeah, it grows beyond what it should, but it gets severe very, very quickly. So. They pull out guns, so I mean, unless they're just trying to scare him, but to me, it looks like they're trying to. I mean, Archie claims otherwise, but to me, it looks like they're trying to kill his ass.
Yeah,
So
or like just like scare him to the point that like I don't know, he like where like you have
well, it
those weird
worked
like
because he
game
was scared shit. I mean,
tactics.
ran out, he bolted. So yeah,
Yeah, and then like it just goes to show another example of it seems like every mentor he had betrayed him at some point, except for his father who died, and then it's he's back in Boston, and this is the scene. This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's the Russian roulette scene. There's this Russian roulette scene because he's there, Sophia's there. I don't remember the character's name, but it's a guy that's like working with them and the robberies with him and Shorty. And I don't even remember exactly how the fight like started or whatever, but like it was something like pretty like I forgot if it was trivial or not. But
it was, but you can see what Malcolm's thinking, like where something that seemed trivial could easily become something where this guy's going to think he's in charge, and then that could turn into a betrayal. I suppose he's, you know, uh, and so he takes this thing that seems like nothing. It might have become something, but he definitely blows it up into just, I mean, and his, yeah, that was an intense scene.
what this scene achieves is it shows you just how unafraid Malcolm X is at this point, and that kind of fearlessness stays with him throughout the rest of his life. Like that never wavers because it's it maybe like tempers a bit, but he is so fearless like in that scene because he's literally like doing Russian roulette and he pops off like
4 times.
he pops off 4 times, and only one time I think was on like the guy and it was like his nose.
Yeah.
So I think he pops up. I think he pulls the trigger 3 times on himself.
This is what I'm confused on. Maybe I'm a dumbass. I mean, because it's so severe so quickly. I mean, where he's Shorty, right? Spike Lee's character asks him if he palmed the bullet, and then he presents a bullet. I'm not sure what that proves because I mean, it doesn't mean he necessarily did. If he did, then that means the whole time there was no risk. But
Right. It's still well okay. If he did palm the, I agree with you because like he could have just had the like had taken out the bullet. I think it's implied that he palmed it, but even if he palmed it, it's a level of aggression and a level of assertiveness that it's like a tool in his tool belt where at this point it's like or like
well, he's
it's like
taking it to 11, definitely, whether it's
right
real or yeah. So
it's like a video game upgrade where it's like Malcolm X has earned the power of fearlessness,
right,
the power of assertion, and
right.
it's just
Maybe it was deliberately ambiguous, or maybe I'm just a dumbass. Like, as I don't know. I mean, but maybe, but I think there's a lot of that where it's walking the tightrope and it doesn't offer obvious answers. So he presents a bullet, doesn't mean he palmed it, doesn't mean he doesn't, as far as I'm. But it does seem like God. I mean, he's sort of lost everything at this point in the film, but still, God, to be willing to just blow your brains off over nothing. or blow your brains out over nothing. And that's the other thing about the girlfriend that I think you kind of see where she falls in all this. She's usually supportive, but at the same time, you know, him putting a fucking gun to his, I mean, she tells him to stop and everything, but you know, if somebody you truly love is putting a gun to their fucking temple, you're probably going to make more of an effort. And you get the sense with her that this is an experience. If he paints the wall in his fucking brains, then it's something she gets to, you know, it's a memory, it's an experience for her, you know. I mean, and I think that's what shows up later.
His relationship with Sophia ends when they're doing, like, immediately, like when they get arrested trying to do a robbery. Him and Shorty, I believe, like, they had like 14 counts of robbery, and they're each like 8 to 10 years.
Yeah,
And Shorty like passed out. It was pretty funny. Like,
yeah,
Shorty passed out just thinking that they were all going to add on top, but they're serving concurrently. So like they're only doing one thing of 8 to 10 years. But, you know, the big, you know, double standard is that the women, Sophia and Shorty's white girlfriend, each got like 3 years or even less, maybe.
yeah.
Um,
From what I looked up, I mean, it looked like they just got away entirely, like they didn't have to serve any time, I think. So
so yeah, like that's pretty fucked up, because I mean they're just like, maybe they weren't flaunting guns, but they're just as complicit. His time in prison is like a total, well, it's not a tone shift, but it's like a total different chapter. Like, it's an obvious chapter.
yeah, I
And
think it's this is probably the second third of the film where it just feels very different. So
yep, this is where he initially is very still like got like that fearlessness, like wildness to him. And he denies reading off his prison number, gets thrown in solitary, and like just refuses water, refuses everything, and pretty much goes crazy until he's like physically and mentally broken, and then he asks for water. And it's pretty demoralizing to watch. And then they bring in this white Christian preacher or whatever to try to kind of save him and like talk him into reason in solitary. And in my notes I have like he just responds like, "What's Jesus done for me?" And
and his idea of Jesus is white Jesus, you know,
mm-hmm,
yeah, blonde, you know, white, yeah, the
yeah.
usual. Yeah, he rejects it because it's white Jesus, you know, and that's so it's just something he can't grab onto.
But yeah, so the important thing about about the prison chapter, I would say, is this prisoner aids him, and it's like in the shower. You kind of alluded to it. He's basically like the good things that this, like, you know, he's later betrayed by this prisoner, by this mentor as well, but in his own way. But
Yeah.
just like the good things that he brings to him is like kind of an awakening of like, just be proud of who you are, be proud of your race. Like,
In that a
he
lot of that speech I really liked, but the only thing I didn't like was what I said earlier, which is just that it outright you know, you're poisoning yourself with that. Like I think that was clear to the audience. I'm
yeah,
not,
with the hair thing.
yeah, I just felt it didn't need to be said. It doesn't totally hurt the movie that it is said, but I just think on a visual level, it already works so well in establishing that idea that you didn't need to say it outright. So it's
Yeah,
not a flaw, but it just,
it's
you
just
know,
you pointed out something you didn't really have to point out.
right.
uh but he does explain other stuff, like, like, Jesus was most likely not white. He was, Hebrew. He was, this Middle Eastern dude. Like, he was darker complected. Like, he
In
had a darker
complexity.
complexion. So it's like, embrace your race, and like, don't feed into, like the fucked up shit that's like white Jesus, and like, I don't like other stuff. And like, they pull out the dictionary, and it's like every definition of like black is like, even after they get past like the scientific like color spectrum stuff and like absorbs light, blah blah blah, like it becomes like just evil. And they're just pointing out basically double standards in like the dictionary and stuff, and how that applies to them.
And
And
it
that
was pretty extreme once, like when that stark contrast. I mean, you're like, come on. And then you start to look at it, you're like, I get what they're thinking, I mean, it's
and
like,
and then like white's all pure or whatever, and like
right. And the black's tainted and yeah.
the prisoner's name is actually Baines, I believe.
Oh, that sounds right. Okay.
He brings him on to like some of the quotes I just wrote down were like, be proud, and then like he's asking like, just think about who you are, and and how like just how you are different from you know a white person in America, and how that's unjust. And then he brings him on to Elijah Muhammad, who is a big deal throughout the rest of the movie, and Malcolm X's real life. Basically helps like convert him to Islam. And it's like a lot of religions, where like you subscribe to the good stuff, and then when you're kind of betrayed later, you reestablish, like, you may not go away from Islam completely or whatever religion you are, but you do find your own code within it. And is kind of like that's kind of a common thing, I think, with a lot of
Yeah.
people. I suppose like everybody has to live by their own code, their own morals, and it's most people use religion as a tool to define those, but some people use it like no matter what, like fundamentally.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think he only just starts to figure out how to think for himself towards the end of the film, which lends itself to the tragedy. But yeah, I mean, on a personal level, that's the thing. I don't have anything against religion, but it's if you can articulate what it means to you personally. If it, like I hate talking to cultists, whether they're religious or not. Like that's the thing I can't like. If it has if something has personally happened to you that shapes your way of seeing things, then like that's fine. But the way, like when he's in solitary confinement, like the white people don't give a fuck. They're like, I don't know what you're doing here. Here's well, ultimately with the preacher or whatever, or what gives them a cigarette, but everybody, they're like, here's your food. I mean, they just don't get what he's trying to say. They don't even, and that kind of showed up in Do the Right Thing with the police. I mean, they don't really give a fuck until right at the very end, that becomes a whole monster. But I mean, but they seem like kind of impartial and indifferent to the statement he's trying to make throughout his time in solitary,
And really, I think kind of the not giving a fuck is a common theme in a lot of Spike Lee's movies, where I think the standing by of people that are either partaking in the injustice or action wise like okay with it, where they're not trying to stop the injustice, like that's where it like you make a good point, where like the white people in Do the Right Thing didn't give a fuck, and look what that led to. Like, it was just a series of not giving a fuck, and then it exploded. And then, to me, this prison sequence where like he takes on Islam is like his not in Kansas anymore moment, where it's kind of like he's opened his eyes past like the veil of like lies and deceit that he's kind of been blind to, and he can kind of begin to self-actualize. He's not self-actualized till the end,
right.
but he takes large steps in that direction, and there's kind of no turning back. Like, he's gonna be who he is from here on out.
Just the first thing is like he's trying to fit into a society. He's trying to survive. He realizes that it isn't going to work because he ends up where he ends up. And then past that point, he latches onto something else. So in a way, I feel like he's leased himself there because this isn't something he's learned himself. He hasn't learned on the streets that being, getting your hair straightened out and all that is going to result in success. But and he just goes along with it, just accepting all this not that I mean, some of it you agree with and some of it you don't and whatever. I mean, but just taking all this, he's very receptive to it almost immediately. One thing I want to say though is that it does, this movie, again, more than most movies that I've seen, does capture what that's like, where you buy into a new way of thinking for the first time, and you think you're fucking enlightened, right? Like
Mhm.
I think that that is something I want to say. Like this movie gets that across better than a lot of other movies that I think I've ever seen. You know, where he's, yeah, he really thinks he's seen the light, the road to
Uh,
Damascus moment, which I think he compares himself to, not entirely, but he brings up Paul, you know, and the blinding light. Like he's like, I mean, I don't compare myself to Paul, but I get that moment, and like that totally makes sense. You know, so yeah, this movie captures that very well.
this portion, he is betrayed by these mentors. He is betrayed by Elijah Muhammad, and he is betrayed by Baines. Um,
Later on,
right.
well, all of that later on, yeah.
Yeah. But they do, like, Baines is the one that still like sparks his flame. You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
like he does not become Malcolm X the way we know without this kind of realization and sort of like direction in his life to where he's gonna shed light and he's gonna be the angry voice, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think MLK was a lot closer to Malcolm X than people give it credit for. I think people like kind of try to like tone MLK
Right.
down a little
Right.
bit. He was like, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing this, but
No,
I believe he like MLK had like socialist tendencies. He owned like,
those seem to be popular whenever you're trying to form a movement, like the social, you know. So
yeah,
again, with the women's liberation and whatever in the early 1900s, same thing. You know, a lot of socialist associations.
they're two voices, and they're also brought up in Do the Right Thing, where it's love and hate. It's so in history books and everything else, and just looking back, like you might look at MLK as like the loving voice of like unity and whatnot in the racial movement, and then you might look at Malcolm X as the angry voice. And I think some people like to think that the angry voice isn't necessary, right? But I think the angry voice, I would argue that the angry voice can be necessary because when some people, because it makes the MLKs look better, basically, because
Right.
you're looking at two alternatives and it's a massive movement. Some kind of change is going to happen. What's the established sort of belief going to turn to? Is it going to turn to Malcolm X, who in the early parts of his career is like, yeah, maybe black people should just, maybe we should all, go back to Africa, have our own militias, just stay segregated, and then just protect ourselves. Like they'll take the tamer alternative, right? So you need like kind of like you like Malcolm X and MLK needed each other, where like I don't think MLK gets enough. Like, I feel like he would be branded in the way that Malcolm X is branded by a lot of historians in a way where, or like maybe not even historians, but just like, you know, like history teachers that don't
Well,
really
when
care
I
that much.
was a kid, I was very aware of the FBI tapes. And that's obviously a very deliberate sabotage of what he represents and everything. But when I was a kid, I was aware, like most obviously weren't, you know, like it's MLK, you know, I have a dream and all that. But I'm like, this dude was banging hookers, he's having orgies, he's I mean, you know, completely unfaithful. And that line comes up later in Malcolm X, where he's, you know, it's like, God, compared to MLK, this dude's a fucking monk, you know, because he's
Well,
talking to his wife.
that's a misconception. Like, I think it's kind of like one hand is like this, right? And the other hand is like this. Are you gonna
The last
like
temptation of Christ,
are,
I love that, where he's like, you know, I believed in love and now I believe in the acts, and that contention always within a religion.
where if neglect, like just proves like dominant, or like, you know, a lack of caring, lack of trying to make things better proves like dominant, and things like decay, like that's when you can't ask anymore. You have to have some voice that's like a demand, right? Otherwise, like, because that's like the weird fucked up thing about human nature is like sometimes, so many times throughout history, change isn't made unless blood is shed, and it's fucked up, but it's true.
I
And
I would I
so
would I,
posing a more militant threat, I think, with Malcolm X helped things actually get done with MLK, because people were like, "Well, reason with you." And Malcolm X is controversial, rather than if it was just MLK, they'd be like, MLK is controversial, and then no progress would be made.
yeah, God, there's so many things there. I mean, it's, I mean, um, I guess first and foremost, there was a book called From Dictatorship to Democracy. I can't remember the fucking author's name. It illustrates that point that you can overthrow a dictatorship, and hence the title From Dictatorship to Democracy, uh, through peaceful means, but then peaceful people have to die. And I get where people wouldn't want to accept that. Um, I mean, yeah, there's so, and like what you said, I mean, where people would see Martin Luther King as being more moderate compared to Malcolm X, that seems like a current political tactic, where it's, if you just pose the most extreme idea possible, then people will scale it back to something that they otherwise might have considered extreme, and now they're like, well, that's much more reasonable compared to whatever. So yeah, I mean, these are timeless issues, at least spanning, God, the past 70 years. They feel pretty timeless. But I feel like that's why people should watch Malcolm X. I mean, it's definitely, I think it's an American epic. I think it's very significant as a film. I think people should see it.
I like
Um,
that you pointed out that it's an American epic, because you don't actually see a ton of what I would define as an epic is often like 3+ hour.
well, it's
Like
that.
it
It's
could
like three and a
it could
half fucking
like
hours. Like
like
right there, I think of an epic.
like three
But
plus hour. I kind of think of like some kind of historical context to it, whether it's like, it could be like a religious movie,
that's what I think
Ben,
of.
like
Like
Ben
Ten
Hur, or
Commandments, Ben-Hur.
yeah.
Yeah.
But like, Spartacus is an epic.
How long? That's like more like two and a half, isn't it? Or what?
I think so, but the scale of the movie matters too, right? So like the
And that's where
scale.
I feel like it's an epic, because I mean it is spanning so much time. It's focused on central character across the decades. Like that's what I think of as being, and
And
like I mean the costume, the wardrobe changing, the set design changing. It feels epic in that sense.
yeah,
So
and to me, the interesting thing about epics is most of the time epics are done in like, Jerusalem
oh,
or Rome or Egypt, or
we got a
maybe
lot of
like,
the biblical epics during the golden age, right? So
yeah, or like a uh kind of a European epic, maybe, like knights, kings and queens type of thing, like knights in shining armor type of movie. Even like, Eastern movies like Ron and some other Kurosawa movies. But what I'm saying is, like, you don't see a lot of American epics. You don't like that are consolidated into the time, like 1776,
yeah.
in America.
Oh
Like,
yeah, they're all biblical epics. They take place hundreds of
yeah,
years ago. Yeah.
yeah, and different countries. So that's one thing I wanted to point out, and I'm glad you pointed out that it's a true American epic.
Actually, that brings up something I remember thinking about years ago. Do you think we've had a modern American epic? Like, because I
The
don't.
most modern. Okay, so let's start with Malcolm X, because this would we would consider an epic.
Yeah, and probably modern still, but I mean,
Pre-
past 10 years.
Pretty damn modern. I'm trying to think of anything in between then that would be considered an epic.
Oh, well, Gangs of New York, then I guess it would consider.
Oh fuck yeah, Gangs of New York I'd consider an epic, but that the place and time that it's set in is before Malcolm X though.
Yeah, well, right. But
So
I guess it's more recent. Yeah, I'm just trying to. I mean, yeah,
so
Scorsese.
the
God,
filming itself is more modern, obviously, because it was made in 2002. But
oh, but dealing with
this,
modern thematic
yeah,
material.
I'm thinking of the
Okay.
most recent subject matter that was put into an epic. So
Oh, yeah,
I
because
can
I just read across the board, like if anything's been made in the past 20, 10, 20 years, that's been you'd consider modern.
you could call
Okay.
JFK an epic.
All right.
You legitimate. I don't think many of them get out of the 60s because the 60s was just such a crazy time, man.
Right.
Like, there's like a really interesting scene after he gets out of prison and he's fully into Islam now. And this is around the time when we see Teresa, I think, as a prostitute. So that, like, because he's kind of like Malcolm X has his shit together, right? He's not a gangster.
He sees her
Um,
with Archie for the second time, and then, but I missed that part that you're talking about where he must have seen her again after being enlightened.
she saw him. He didn't see her,
Oh,
which is the even more fucked up part because it's kind of like, oh, he's got his shit all together. Like, look how powerful and like strong of a human being he
but now
is,
she's a prostitute. Yeah.
and she's lost everything, and he's become more noble, and
But
she's
she was so
become
much more pure than he was originally. I mean, he's fucking
he's
around and
yeah,
she,
his
yeah.
soul has purified and hers has decayed, like in
And so
her
much
eyes.
is that she did it for noble reasons. You could like she's probably trying to provide her boyfriend. Yeah, God, that's all.
It's low key like terribly depressing that scene.
It's
Like
about three stages. So there you go. Like anybody taking note, you could tell a horribly tragic story in 3 notes.
and it's not just her that are like his old friends that are down and out now,
Well,
because
no,
you go
that's the whole point. Is that
yeah,
this is happening to everybody, you know, and
this is
a
kind of
lot of
the decay that society got them in, and I think Malcolm X sees it as like, you know, they they did not find Allah, they did not find enlightenment like I did, which I don't. He's not. I don't think he's fully enlightened at this point. I don't think Malcolm X like. I don't think that's not his arc just yet.
you definitely see somebody who's on the path to it, which heightens that tragedy. This is somebody who could have been truly enlightened. And I think he was extinguished just right before that, you know?
Yeah, and he's coming by people that just stayed in the in the gangster life, stayed in crime life, stayed in just stayed in their own situation and let life fuck them up. You know what I mean? To a certain degree. And he Shorty isn't totally screwed. He's like relative to his old friends, he's kind of got his shit together, but not really. But like Delroy Lindo, Archie is like strung out, and I kind of forgot. Like he barely made any sense when he would talk, and it was just kind of like this weird, like that was a complicated scene.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean yeah, I don't know if he had like a stroke from drug use or something. I think he's fucked up. So
yeah,
he has to, I mean, he's in fact he's so I mean he has to move his arm to stimulate blood flow. Like I think he's had a stroke. I think he just is so drugged up that he's had a fucking stroke and nobody's there to take care of him. So Malcolm's rotating his arm for him and whatever, you know, and he says it was nothing personal. He was never going to actually kill him. And from what we see, it's debatable, whatever, but he's just so tragic by the time we find him that it, much as Malcolm's number and whether that was correct or not, whether Archie intended to kill him is almost irrelevant. It's like he's so debilitated, and I think the other thing I think Malcolm says in the movie is it feels weird, but I mean. Is that he could have maybe been a mathematical genius, and when you think about it, I mean he's storing all of those numbers in his fucking head. One slip up, he's so sure that that's impossible. I mean, so we probably are actually dealing with possibly a mathematical genius, and then to see him reduced to this is tragic. he's so pathetic by the time that we meet him that it does instill sympathy. So again, as a portrait, the picture is effective there.
And
So
I think that just reinforces Malcolm's devotion to his path, where he now has seen the friends that he had that did not like follow that path or follow any path really. That was like, some sort of like productive or like thought enriching path. It was just, I want to get married. It was, I want to make money as a gangster. Like, you know what I mean?
well, it's a typical arc for what you should strive for in life, and something that shows up throughout the movie is that he seems to almost be self-aware of a certain character progression, which you don't know whether he's actually on that progression as a person or if he just thinks he is. And again, it's that razor thin line that the movie balances. You don't know if this is somebody who's full of themselves or if this is somebody who's truly on their way to enlightenment, or something close to it. Somebody who's really striving for actual answers and not crawling up their ass. They really might almost be so moldable as to, because being too moldable is a bad thing, but he's so moldable that he might almost become something greater than the average person if he continues down this path, because he's so not tied down like he as soon as something confronts him, that he sees as being untrue or like with Elijah Muhammad or what, that he moves on to the next thing. You almost get the sense there's something hinted at that he is going to move past that, and we don't get a clear-cut answer because it's abbreviated by the end of the picture, but you get the sense that maybe he could have moved beyond even that and really been the answer, or some as close as somebody could get in a lifetime to an answer, and I think, it well, there's a lot to say there, but I mean, I just but this is all inference. This is nothing that the film states outright. It's just, again, I think the best that a biopic can strive for, this movie accomplishes in being a portrait. So from the portraiture or whatever, this is the sense that you get, and it does feel like a tragedy, which.
And around this time is when he kind of goes off with a bunch of like kind of sexist, like really sexist beliefs just to his wife in a dinner.
And she still goes along with it. So it's like, I mean, I think which is an interesting scene.
She goes, yeah, like it is
not
an
totally,
interesting
but she.
I think I think what it does is it brings out like the truth of like it's more Elijah talking than Malcolm at that point, I think.
Yeah. I think she knows that, but she sees the true man beneath the message that he's, yeah.
And I think this is like the best way that Spike Lee could have possibly addressed this, because you can't tell the story of Malcolm X without talking about like some of these like, really fundamentalist Islamic beliefs where like women should, cover their face and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they present it when Betty, who is his like, future wife, played by Angela Bassett, like she kind of holds the audience's hand through that scene. You know what I'm saying? Where like
in a very subtle and nuanced fucking way, where it's not, she's like, oh yeah, she's not challenging him, but she almost is in being so restrained. I mean, it's like it highlights his extremism, and so she seems virtuous because she's not challenging it, because like he sounds like a cultist in a way, but he not completely. You do see also his values. I mean, like some of them is being valuable. I mean, by saying almost nothing, she says everything and being more.
It's an undercurrent, and it's like,
yeah,
like you could kind of see in her eyes that she's like, oh, fuck off. But
right, but she's going with it because she knows there's more to him, and I think that's just a great scene in that way.
There's more potential in him, and she's willing to trust it, and that's really what the audience is doing here, because
Right.
it's a complicated scene. Trust in who he is, and he's gonna reach his point where like if things come together for him. And then we have a really famous scene in the movie that is, I guess you don't really call it an action sequence, but this black man, I think his last name is Johnson, that's what I wrote down, was beat nearly to death and then arrested. And there's a
Oh,
ton of these cases
it's
where,
about halfway, I think.
yeah, and there's basically Malcolm X goes in there to make sure that he gets medical care, because there is a long history of, like black people being arrested and then, you know, beat up like in the process or whatever.
You
And
guys like head cracked open by a nightstick.
yeah, and there was just, there's been a bunch of people that would, die in the cell, and then they would get off with like not having police brutality, because it would just be,
After the
it'd
fact
be
or
like,
something.
oh, it was after the fact, and it's altogether easier to hide in a court case and everything. And Malcolm X wasn't going to let that happen to this guy. So he and a couple other people with him go in, check on him, and he's like, no, he needs to go into a hospital right now. And then they escort him to the hospital with like a big line of people. And it's just such a good scene. And one of my favorite scenes of the movie is when he directs the mob, like just by like pointing a finger.
Yeah, single
And
gesture.
it's just how much, and then they hit the nail on the head a little bit with like, no one man should have that much power. But
Right.
like
But it's
it still works, because it's just like it does show you just how much like power he had, like and just influence. And I think in a way, and like it's not all like negative, it's not like a negative influence, but like it does like show you how powerful he was, and how like this is like him kind of coming into his own, where he is respected and feared by, though, you know what I mean, like.
it feels a little sudden because I mean even the audience doesn't know how much influence he truly has till that scene in the film. So um
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the more difficult things to convey, is like a gradual like steps up a staircase of like
yeah,
how
I mean
much
I won't
power
say it's
someone
even a
gets.
criticism. It's just I mean I think in the same way that it catches the audience by surprise, it catches the police by surprise is probably what he was striving for, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, some people take power like overnight, damn near. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's perfectly like I love that scene.
Yeah.
Um, he gets married shortly after that, and then like there's a big like, I believe they show like four speeches in a row, and that's when you get some of the stuff that's like black people and white people should remain segregated, which are some of the more like controversial things. And then like
Well, we
basically,
see his father was preaching that. I think that was his idea, was that all blacks should go back to Africa and form their own nation and be mighty as they once were, where they can actually be. So you can see where that might have influenced his views on things.
and
You know,
an interesting thing too in like just in history is that like Abraham Lincoln actually didn't believe that black people and white people could live together.
but that's my frustration with the fucking movie, is that this is the problem with the biopic, is that it glosses over
of
all of that.
of Lincoln.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Daniel Day
Yeah,
Lewis.
this is definitely superior to Lincoln, although Daniel Day-Lewis is great.
Well, no, yeah,
Because of
he's
course he's
great,
great.
but the biopic was too simple. It
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah,
It, yeah, it was whatever. And then
right.
but like, so he was more complicated Lincoln was more complicated than that, like,
A
because he
lot
didn't.
of political maneuvering, and right. So
Yeah, he didn't believe that black people and white people could live together in the same country or in the same continent. So and then this is when the Elijah like faithfuls start to think that he might be getting too much press and like making it too much about himself. And then that's immediately almost like contradicted when we find out that Elijah cheated and has like 10 kids.
These women are underage, so right there, that's
Yeah.
by law wrong. But just on any kind of principle. So I think that's where he becomes disillusioned very quickly. And I mean, the movie makes it out to be on principle, whether it was or if it was vanity. I think it leaves a little leeway for, but the movie does seem to be sympathetic. And I mean, in terms like it does seem to be a matter of principle in the film. So
Yeah.
the most severe detractors would say it was vanity, but in the film, it pretty clearly says it's a matter of principle. So
So Malcolm X feels this betrayal, and that starts like to get his paranoia up. Um, Shortly after this is when he has the JFK chickens coming home to roost quote uh, that upset people, and that's like kind of the peak of like the I guess unaccessible Malcolm X would be to like everybody,
yeah,
or at
that's
least the peak.
especially in '92. I like people would not be receptive to that fucking idea at all, even to that point.
Well,
You know,
yeah, and even at the time, like I'm sure, like a lot of civil rights activists, like Black civil rights activists, were like, I mean,
whether
as
they agreed or not, they were like, "That's definitely not something you can fucking say."
well,
Yeah.
and yeah, like they might agree with him for sure. Like he has a point, like in like kind of a bitter way. Um, and
It feels like he's trying to make a bitter point that's going to force the group to ostracize him. I think he's testing his own independence in that scene by saying that. You
mm,
know, like he has an original idea that he's told he can't express, and yet he disagrees with it. He feels this way, and he I think is testing that out. And then once it's rejected, I think that's for whatever reason the last straw for him, where he's like, okay, I'm not compatible with this movement.
and for people that know nothing about JFK, it's important to understand that although not perfect, he was probably the most receptive to the civil rights movement, like at least compared to the other presidents, which comparing presidents to presidents is like, yeah, it's yeah. After the JFK thing, he really kind of loses touch with the Elijah bit of like his religion.
The scene when he first meets him, one of the probably some of the best acting in the whole picture, right, where
Mm-hmm.
he can't even stand to look upon him. He's so, he's weeping. And you remember that?
Yeah,
That just stood out to me. I thought that was a great piece of acting. But go ahead. Sorry, just wanted to point that out.
and then he has like another like set of like news appearances and interviews where he's changed his mind on some things, and he thinks that it is productive to work together with all the races to try to solve some of these issues.
Mm.
uh, he still believes that black people at this I think he uses as at this point in time control our own communities, because there's still like he still doesn't trust like totally, and understandable. He's willing to work together, and he still wants to control black people control their own communities. He thinks white people can help but not join. And then I don't know if this is a direct quote from the movie, but I wrote this down. Cannot unite with whites until we unite with ourselves. So
Right.
that's
That was
that's like the important thing is I think he sees
at the very
problems,
end of the film. I think that's what he says.
and this goes back to like how he saw this decay within his own people. You know what I mean? With well, he didn't see Teresa, but Teresa becoming a prostitute, Shorty uh not being affluent, I
Whether he
suppose.
sees them or not, again, the idea of the portraitures, I mean, it's showing the audience this, which is in turn probably showing what's on his mind.
Yeah, it's the decay he sees in his own community that he decides
Right.
that needs to be the main focus at this point. And then this is when he decides to go to Mecca, and he sees the pyramids, and this is probably the happiest part of the movie. Um This is when he like really believes like there can be one humanity. Like he explains that he, for the first time ever, because to this point he had literally never met a white person that has done him right. You know what I mean? Like
At
like
least
the
through the lens
closest
of, I mean,
the closest person would be like Sophia, but
no,
not
no, he
really.
lumps her in with everybody. Like he's, and I think
Right.
rightfully so. I mean, I do think Sophia at the end of the day, was not the best. I mean, she was ready to let him paint the wall in his brain matter. So, that's typically not what a loved one does.
Even
Right.
so, she could have like maybe like vouched for him more in court, or I don't know. Like that's like the closest thing to like a good experience with a white person consistently that he had, because everyone else before that is like shitty priests, shitty cops, shitty prison guards, shitty
Teachers, yeah.
shitty teachers when he was a kid. That was a big one. um but like in this, like when he's seeing the pyramids and stuff and praying with people, like he's like, I talked as much about Islam and prayed with like with a man with skin like white as paper and eyes like that are blue, and just as I did with like a black person and then a brown person, so he's really starting to see everybody as one humanity. And as soon as that shit happens, that's when someone's got to kill you.
Right.
So, like, that's kind of consistent throughout history. Uh, like he
As soon as you
doesn't.
start preaching the peace,
As soon as,
that's
yep,
when
as
you do.
soon as he takes out the like here he, I believe they say like no sweeping indictments. And then his house is burned again, and
Well,
or
first time. Oh no, 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 second time, because yeah, he was a kid in that house when it got
his
burned down.
his own
Yeah.
house is burned. And then, like you said, like the parallels with him and his father. Giancarlo Esposito plays one of the assassins of.
He barely says a word. I mean, I think he says like one sentence in this whole movie. And Spike Lee had cast him. I didn't see the movie, but it was I think School Days, so he'd cast him before. So this wasn't the
Yeah,
first.
he was in Do the Right Thing too, actually. Yeah, Giancarlo Esposito has been like good in a lot of movies. And I don't know, him and Malcolm X is pretty. I don't know, like you see it in his eyes where it's like, okay, this fucker's gonna do something from the beginning. And
Well, just the
then
way he's dressed, again, the black leather jacket and everything. I mean, he's an ominous presence. You know.
yeah, and I mean, he just plays a good bad guy from Breaking Bad to
Oh, yeah.
Mandalorian. It's good to see him get, you know, some recognition
Yeah,
later in his
that's
career. Like it kind of, I feel bad for like so many actors of all kinds that like, for whatever reason,
just never got
like
noticed.
never get noticed until they're damn in their 50s, and then they're gonna have like 10 good years, and then
Actually, wasn't
they're gonna want to slow
Sam
down a little
Jackson
bit.
was kind of that way, except he's lasted much longer.
Dude, yeah, like that dude, he's damn near, like he's in his upper 60s, I think. He almost
Well,
like,
Do the Right Thing is probably the earliest I've actually seen him. Is there anything that goes further back than that? Like, I mean,
I don't know, like maybe it's a common thing with, honestly, like non-white actors, because like Morgan Freeman is similar. Like he had that one role when he was young. I don't remember the actual title of the movie, but I remember he's like in the back of a cab, and like it's just like different because you see young Morgan Freeman and you're like,
well,
what? Like I've never seen young Morgan Freeman. It takes years of work for some
yeah,
people to get the recognition.
and
And
Giancarlo definitely the earliest I've seen. I didn't even know he was working this early, So,
and
uh,
then Lawrence Fishburne, he was in Apocalypse Now, of
oh yeah,
course.
yeah, I know.
But
And
even
Spike
with
Lee cast him in a
even with
few
him,
things.
there was a pretty big gap.
Yeah,
So I don't know. Like it's it's fucked up.
yeah,
Um, I love how they play out like his death with the bodyguard, and like how it's kind of becoming like a G like I bring up like Jesus a lot in movies, but I think it does show up in
no,
a lot of
I know
movies.
I've been doing the same
It's
thing. I'm worried
it's
everybody's gonna think I'm like
it's
a
like
Jesus freak.
he knows he's going to get killed. But well, here's the one thing about the ending that I don't absolutely like, that scene, I should say, that I don't
Don't
absolutely
let my
love.
opinion shape it. Like, I mean, I go ahead, whatever you
Well,
think
no,
of it.
it would just be about the family, because he asks, "Is my family in the is my family here?" And they're like seated in the front row, and then I think, and in the movie we're supposed to be like, okay, I think he knows he's going to die, and he's okay with it because he's going to at least be able to see his family before it happens. But if he knows he's going to die, wouldn't he want his family to not be there, under the risk that the killers know what his family looks like and would kill them?
They already clearly know. But that's something I'm not actually sure. This is where it starts to disintegrate a little bit. I'm not sure if his family was ever actually there. I watched,
Oh, in real life, you're not sure if their family's there?
yeah, I'm not right. I don't know how much of that is accurate.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't think it's a criticism so much as it is a question, because it still works in the movie. You know what I mean?
yeah, I
Like,
mean, he's dead. He doesn't have any last words. I mean, but I do like that you brought up that it's almost like a Jesus moment where he's realizing the Judas within his ranks, which is something I didn't really think about.
but yeah, the song Born on the River plays, and it's really powerful. And one of my last notes is it just reads, "A time for martyrs."
Oh yeah,
Um,
no, that is in the movie, but everything you're saying, I mean, you've illustrated some things that I didn't think of that aren't in the movie. So I mean, the Judas dynamic, I don't think is ever outright stated, and uh,
mhm.
it's playing into that. So yeah, there is. I know the martyr. That's weird.
And
Why I thought the martyr statement was too overt, but now that you've kind of reframed it, I feel like it almost works better.
well, I suppose it's not overt because it's the fucking '60s, man. Like, people that believed in something were dropping like flies. Like, so
Right.
that's kind of, I think that's kind of what they're getting at. And as soon as reason and balance is becoming found in a world leader, people that are threatened by reason kill that motherfucker.
No, that's something
It
I've since I was a kid I've observed. It's like anybody, as soon as they start preaching peace, they're fucking dead.
like, people are threatened by reason and peace.
A quick note would be when they're calling over and over, it did feel ominous. Like it did feel intimidating. It's just something I want to say. Like it
Yeah.
does create a
Oh,
little dread.
the home phone calls. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have that entire sequence where it's like 8 rings back to back,
Mhm.
and you
Not to
got
say that would intimidate me. You're free to call me. I'm lonely. So I have some criticisms, and they only come in towards the end of the film. And I'll try to be as concise as possible. I felt that epilogue sequence where you have like Nelson Mandela preaching to the school children. Like I just felt it was like, too over the. It was too much. I felt if it ended on sort of the almost like God Chinatown level of depressing, that would be this guy getting assassinated right when he was on the precipice of a breakthrough. Might have been the better way to end it, but it felt preachy in a way that everything before. I was really surprised that the movie wasn't very preachy. And I know that there are a lot of movies I feel that they've earned a moment of preachiness or whatever, and like by being so restrained, but I feel it really did undermine the movie. It's like something like Schindler's List works. This I felt didn't. I felt like if it left you to think about it and think about what was lost instead of telling you, it would have worked a lot better because that's the way the movie operates all the way through.
I think that's the first time, like, JFK kind of ends preachy in that way too, but where like he's like, "Oh, in 19 or in 2015 people can look at the records and see what happened." What I was going to say about the movie is maybe it's so jarring because this is like literally the first part of the movie where we do not actually see Malcolm X and Denzel Washington, right? And you watch 3.5 hours of a movie with the guy, and it doesn't end on the
And it
guy.
breaks perspective for the
Or
first time. And that's a big thing.
it ends on him though, because the subject matter is him. They are saying, I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X. It has enough good grace that I do think it works.
I
But
think especially at the time, Nelson Mandela in 92, I get what they were going for.
I think there could have been better ways to do it, but I also think that it does go in your taste, where like how much subtlety are you, like how much subtlety is the viewer looking for. uh in the case of Malcolm X, I don't think, being like, I don't think anyone like ought to be expecting like too much subtlety, because like that's not even Malcolm X's style.
I felt like God, if it really just ended on that note of his assassination, you'd get the sense that this was somebody who could have went on.
You'd have a greater sense of the loss rather than the achievement. Do you want to celebrate the legacy, or do you want to kind of feel the loss? You know what I mean? If you want to,
Legacy feels so at odds with the rest of the restraint of the movie that I feel like the loss is depressing and not mainstream as it would have been. I get where he wants to make a statement and he has this one opportunity to do so, and it doesn't sink the movie. But I feel like as a work of art, the better choice would have been to end on his assassination.
yeah, and then part of that plays into like the burden though of like, you know, the opportunity that the few like black directors, especially at that time, where
No,
like
yeah, I don't blame him
like
for doing what he
where
did.
like yeah, like, like that's like one of the fucked up things is like a lot of people like point out like, why does every like black, and this isn't even true, but why does that, like, there's like a lot of people that would say like, why would every like black director have to make a race movie, or what, you know what I mean? And they feel a sense of obligation is what it is, like, because I mean they made it in to some degree, right? But if
They have to
they
say something that nobody else is saying at that time,
they owe it to their community is what it is. So
So they might not be
I
making
so
movies they want to make, but they're making the movies they feel they have to make. You know,
in some cases, and that's a burden, like in a way where like, like Steve McQueen, the director, I'll put up a picture
yeah.
because a lot of people might not know about him. He directed 12 Years a Slave.
Now everybody's
he
gonna think of the actor who
he
is great, but
Yeah, he also directed Shame, which is just a movie about like a white sex addict.
which
Like
is another movie that you put me onto, and I waited years and years and years afterwards. So I fucking love that movie. So
Shame's amazing. There's the burden of having made it to the degree that a black American filmmaker can make it, but they have to like, just look back
well, and
and
and he's in that impossible position where it's like, I mean, people are going to argue that he's trying to make it too palatable to general audiences, you know, and then general audiences are going to say he's being too extreme. And I feel like, especially with the benefit of hindsight, you can look at Malcolm X as really being the ultimate tightrope walk. And I feel like he does pull it off better than most movies don't even dare to handle really controversial subject matter like this, you know. But for even the movies that do, this is one of the better examples of walking that tightrope, you know.
yeah.
So he's gonna maybe piss off everybody, but
I
with the limited
genuinely
knowledge,
think he doesn't care. I think Spike Lee has got to be the most bulletproof director in like out there at this point. Movies like it, um, a bunch of Spike Lee stuff. Get into it. There's some less heavy. Like he has a lot of heavy movies, which are great. Like
right?
but like a less heavy,
More
more like comedy version would be like She's Gotta Have It, which has its own kind of depressing portions to it.
The actor in that plays, like, is it Frankie or Jamie or whatever, is in a Morgan Freeman adaptation of the last hours of Malcolm X made for TV.
And if you're into the 60s era, Selma. You can watch JFK. I think someone that watches this would like Black Klansman. They would like Do the Right Thing. It's another heavy one. So let's give it a review. Out of 5 stars, I am gonna give Malcolm X 5 stars because I think it's one of probably the top 2 movies of the year it came out, right between it and Unforgiven. To me, I think it's a clear top 2 that year, and pretty much any year, I feel like my favorite movie out of that year is probably worthy of a 5-star rating. That's how I like to think about it.
I mean, I thought about it a lot, but ultimately a 4.5 for me.
Gotcha.
Um,
Stars are arbitrary. I explained it in 7. I explained it before.
I have a little more trouble with them because like I'm always trying to represent the masses as opposed to my own view, and so it always ends up being a half-star difference. But I think this is 4.5. I think it is truly an epic, an American epic that I think is really, yeah, it's one of the better biopics. It's, I'd say, an American epic. It's, yeah, 4.5. So
Have a good one, everybody.
all right.
Remember, Black Lives Matter, and observe Black history in every month. This will not be the only month like that we do a movie from a Black film director. We're gonna do multiple Spike Lee movies. We're gonna definitely do some Steve McQueen movies, and those are not all just gonna be reserved for February. Black history is a part of world history and should be talked about throughout the year, but we are observing it. Have a good one, everybody, and I will risk assassination by peacing out.